There were less happy precedents also from the pre-1949 period in the relations between the Chinese Communist Party and the Soviet Union. A series of Chinese-Soviet economic enterprises in China's northwest and northeastern border areas were not so much examples of bilateral cooperation than of old-fashioned imperialism, Soviet style. These were, in theory, joint ventures, but managed in fact as Soviet facilities on Chinese soil. A second unhappy precedent was in the legal status of Soviet citizens in China. A very famous manifesto, the so-called Karakhan Manifesto of 1919, which was the first to state the generous terms on which the Soviet state was prepared to renounce imperialism and its entitlements in China, made promises that were never fulfilled. And indeed, the Soviet Union would be the only power not to relinquish its extraterritorial privileges in China. Stalin would personally inform Liu Shaoqi, China's second in command, that any Soviet personnel in China would be subject to Soviet jurisdiction, with the Chinese side having no legal authority over them. The lack of Soviet concern for Chinese national sovereignty was taken furthest with the separation of Outer Mongolia from China. This had been a political fact of life, really, since the 1920s, but the nationalist regime had resisted its legitimization until the very last moments of the Chinese-Soviet treaty negotiations of 1945. When Mao Zedong made his pilgrimage to Moscow in 1949 and 1950 to renegotiate but not to repudiate that treaty, the loss of Mongolia was confirmed. But despite these tensions, by 1950 there were excellent reasons, excellent historical reasons, for a Chinese-Soviet alliance that went beyond ideological affinity or strategic partnership. For economic development in general and industrial development in particular, the Sino-Soviet relationship of the 1950s harkened back to Sun Yat-sen's grand plan to, quote, develop the vast resources of China internationally under a socialist scheme, as he put it, for the good of the world in general and of the Chinese people in particular. More immediately, the Sino-Soviet cooperation was less a revolutionary break than a logical progression from the nationalizations of industry and foreign trade that the nationalist government had pursued in its final years on the Chinese mainland.